There was a Yid in Telz. He was called Ramotel Pogromansky. There's a book that recently came out about him, a book written in Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, a fascinating book about the lion in the lion's den of Telz. The Telz Beis Medrash in pre-war Europe was known as being one of those Botei Medrash where you entered into a lion's den. These were Talmidim who sat and learned and toiled in Torah, and they were lions. When they learned something, they had a svara, it needed to be explained, it needed to be expressed, analyzed, and stood up for. And Ramotel was the lion of lions. In fact, one of the remit that he had in the time that he was in the yeshiva was to help boys from outside of Telz to appreciate the culture and blend in with that which was Telz. The story is told about him that he was once traveling between the two wars with a friend of his from Telz to Kovna. And as was customary for two Telz Bochrim who were traveling together, they got involved in a discussion in Torah. And the discussion became more and more lively and more in depth. And the journey continued and continued. At one juncture where they came to a point where they could make a break in their discussion, one of them looked at their watch and noticed that it was way past the time they should have arrived in Kovna. In fact, it was after Chatzos, Erev Shabbos, after midday, and getting closer to Shabbos, and he turns to his friend and he says, Motel, it's after Chatzos, when are we arriving in Kovna? He says, 1 minute. Turns to the other passengers in the cabin, and he asked them, tell me, when are we arriving in Kovna? He said, what do you mean? We arrived ages ago. He said, why didn't the train stop? He said, of course the train stopped. Everyone got off. So why didn't no one tell us about it? He said, the two of you, the way you are, we're not disturbing you. Okay, the decision they made between them was that the very next stop they were going to disembark, and it was almost Shabbos, they had no choice. The next stop that comes, they disembark, and they look up and they see the name of the train station, and they don't recognize it. And in those days, if you came to a station in Lithuania and you didn't recognize the name, you were pretty sure if you didn't recognize the name, that town didn't have a Jewish community. There was no Yiddish Yechiel. And this was a town in which the name was not known to them, and they were correct in assuming there was no Yiddish Yechiel. And his friend turns to him and says, Motel, what are we going to do? We're lost. To which he replied, a Yid is never lost. A Yid is Kemol Nishtaf Alayna. His friend says, what do you mean? It's Erev Shabbos, we don't know where to go. He says, I'll tell you, you know Rashi in Parshas Vayero in this week's Parsha? Rashi says like this: Hagar was banished from Avraham Avinu's home and sent into the desert with her son. And the pasuk says, "Vatelech vateisa b'midbar." In the laning that we lane on Rosh Hashanah, she went vateisa and she got lost in the desert. And says Rashi, "Vatelech vateisa b'midbar." This teaches us shechazron legilulei beis Aviyah. She went back to serve David Azar of her father's house. Said Ramotel to his companion, "How does Rashi know that?" In fact, you could strengthen this question. In last week's parasha, we see that Hagar, when she ran away from Avraham Avinu's house initially, she was in that desert and she met Malach after Malach after Malach, and she navigated her way perfectly well through the desert. So why was it that suddenly this week we learn that she comes into the desert and she gets lost? How can that be? And furthermore, he asked, how does Rashi know that she went back to serving Avodah Zarah? And he answered like this: when Hagar was part of Avraham Avinu's home, when she embraced the ideals of Avraham Avinu's household, where Emunah pulsated in their veins, then she knew, why am I in this desert? That's where the Rebbeinu Shalom wants me to be. Why am I in this situation? That's what the Rebbeinu Shalom wants from me. When a person lives a life like that, why am I here? Why am I facing this situation that I find myself in? It's because Hashem wants me to, and He's my guide, and He's going to continue to help me through that. When a person appreciates that and focuses on one situation in that type of way, one has Emunah, then the Rebbeinu Shalom guides them. Whether it's this type of message or that type of message or a malach, it's all different malachim from the Rebbeinu Shalom to guide a person. And the person guides and they're not lost. But in this week's parsha, in the end of Parshas Vayero, where Hagar has been banished from Avraham Avinu's home, and some say never to return, and she has now rejected the ideals of Avraham Avinu's house. If you don't have Emunah, then you're lost. And if you don't have Emunah, then what do you have? She returned to the idol worship of her father's house. If one doesn't have Emunah in the Rebbeinu Shalom, then why am I in this situation? Do I have an answer? Why am I in this place? Why am I in this predicament? I have no answer. Then a person's lost. He said to his friend, but we are ma'aminim, b'nei ma'aminim. We are believers. We are Jews who are believers, and we believe the Rebbeinu Shalom guides us wherever we go. We are not lost. And his friend said to him, Machal, it's a gavaldi gavat. And I'm sure it's an emes dika pshat in Rashi. Lamaisa, we're lost. What are we going to do? It's Erev Shabbos. So he scans the train station and he points to one person. He says, that person must be a resident of the local town. Walks over to him and says, Tell me, are you a local resident? He says, yes, I am. Are there any Jews who live there? He says, there's one Jew who lives in this town, and you can imagine everyone knew where that Jew lived. So he says, can you tell me the directions to his home? And sure enough, he finds his way, and he comes to his home, and he climbs the steps and knocks on that Jew's door. And the Jew opens the door and looks at Ramathal, and out of his mouth he spills, are you Eliyahu Hanavi? He says, no, my name is Mothel. But why do you ask? He says, I've got to tell you, last Shabbos my wife had a baby boy. Tomorrow is going to be Yom HaShoni, the 8th day, and I've tried all week to secure a mile. In the nearby cities, in the nearby towns, I've done everything that I could, and I turned to the Rabbi today and I said, Eibishter, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I have tried. I've done everything at my disposal to try and bring this about, but it's not worked. And I was sure that he had sent you as the messenger, and you are Eliyahu Hanavi. He says, I'm not Eliyahu Hanavi, and to be honest with you, I'm not even a mile. But he turns back to look at his friend. My friend happens to be a mile, and it just happens to be that he's got all the tools, all the kelim needed to do a bris milah for your son tomorrow. And he turns to his friend and he says, a yid is amala faloyana? A yid is ever lost? A yid is kemal nishta faloyana. A Jew is never lost. Because we have Emunah, we know that the Rebbe guides us, and when we live a life like that, then we are never lost. We are in the comfortable hands of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who will guide us and lead us to the places that we need to go with a tremendous siyata d'ishmaya.